Welcome to the Grammar Workshop brought to you by FGCU's Writing Center. And as you can see from this delightful newspaper, we are going to be looking at comma errors. We're going to be looking at semicolons and colons. We're going to be looking at the confusing apostrophe. And finally, we'll be looking at some common mistakes. So let us begin with the number one offender of all grammar, the comma. And we'll be focusing on 5 comma errors or clarifications. First is commas, then compound sentences. Second, commas after introductory clauses. Third, commas in lists. 4, commas with non-essential clauses. And finally, the notorious comma splice. Let's begin with compound sentences. Boom. So, commas are used with coordinating conjunctions to separate independent clauses. Independent clauses are little simple sentences, sometimes people call them. They're a group of words and they're a sentence by themselves. You need a subject and a verb, at least. And coordinating conjunction are fanboys, is an acronym, remember them? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboys. And here's some examples. There you go. Sue was late to work, comma, for her car would not start, right? Sue was late to work, comma, and George was angry, all right? So you have a comma, then you have your conjunction in a compound sentence. We have 2 independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. Perfect. Simple. Second, comma after introductory clauses. Boom. So introductory clauses are phrases that occur before the independent clause, before the main part of the sentence, and they often begin with the words although, before, with, since, though, until, when, while. That is not always the case, but that is often the case. I like to think about them this way. You have a subject and you have a verb, the main part of a sentence. And the first example would be I better understand, right? Or I understand, whatever. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff before that subject. Since I attended the Writing Center's grammar workshop, all of that information is coming before the main subject and verb of the sentence, so that's introductory material. That's how I think about it. All of that introductory material in this case could not stand alone as a sentence. It needs the rest of the sentence, the independent clause, to make any sense. So, since I attended the Writing Center's grammar workshop, comma, now we're into our main part of the sentence, I better understand comma usage. Although my paper wasn't due until the following week, comma, I visited, right? I visited is the main point of the sentence. I visited the Writing Center on Monday. Okay, boom. Next on to lists. Now everybody knows these lists. You have a list of things, you need commas, and you need a conjunction, right? But something I want to mention is parallel structure. So as a human race, no, it's not a human race. As English speakers, we've all decided that we do not like when structure is not parallel in lists. So for example, we have Mary likes hiking, swimming, and bicycling. You wouldn't say Mary likes hiking, to swim, and bicycling because it sounds weird. And again, as English-speaking people, we've collectively decided that we do not like that, so you don't do it. Second, the Oxford comma. So that's a comma before a conjunction in a list. In the first example, Sue, Ted, and Blaine all share equally in my estate, versus Sue, comma, Ted, comma, and Blaine. Second example is the Oxford comma. The truth of the matter is you can find examples where both the Oxford comma and not having the Oxford comma leads to some confusion, right? In this case, we have some confusion about who's getting an equal share. Is Sue getting one part of the share and then Ted and Blaine getting the other part of the share, or are they all getting an equal share? So you got to think, right? But Oxford comma, that's what it is. Boom. Non-essential clauses. Non-essential clauses are clauses in a sentence, phrases, words, whatever, that are not essential to the meaning of the actual sentence. So in the first, so this again, it can be a clause, phrase, or word. So in the first example, we have Florida Gulf Coast University, comma, which is a public university, comma, offers a great deal of academic assistance to its students, which is a public university, is not essential. If you took it away, we'd still have a sentence. Florida Gulf Coast University offers a great deal of academic assistance to its students. I like to think about it as a little aside. Like the whatever voice or whatever is writing that sentence, there's a little aside in the middle of the sentence that's giving some sort of additional information that is not essential to understanding, but is perhaps interesting, or whatever. Second one, FGCU is, for the most part, an environmentally friendly campus, right? That's a qualification, but if you took that out, the sentence would still make sense. Last one, we're just with a word. I generally enjoy going to the movies. This movie season, however, has been disappointing, right? That's a transitional word. It's really emphasizing the purpose, I guess, of that part of the sentence, but it's not essential. So you put it in commas. Set it off with commas. So on the other hand, we have restrictive elements, and these are essential to the meaning of the sentence, right? So if you put those words, phrases, etc. in commas, it would make the sentence not make sense. So people who drink and drive should not be allowed to purchase cars. If you remove that, people should not be allowed to purchase cars. That doesn't make any sense, right? Second example, Paul and George, who were convicted of driving under the influence, have had their license revoked. The main idea here is their license has been revoked, so that information, while it's additional information, it's qualifying some things, is not essential, so we want to put it in commas. Okay, moving along. Comma splices, the dreaded comma splice. What is a comma splice? I'm sure many of you ask yourself that, and many of you have seen this written on your papers. Whoop. Comma splice is an error that happens when a comma is used to separate two independent clauses. So in our compound sentence example, we had two independent clauses, and you need a comma and a conjunction for that to work. So if you take that conjunction away, you now have a comma splice. You have two independent clauses joined with a comma. That's a no-no. Comma splice. So to fix that, one way is to add that coordinating conjunction back in, right? Use one of those fanboys. Or you can have a period, right? A period is, let's make these two separate sentences. Finally, you can use a semicolon. A semicolon is when a comma and a period have a baby, they fall in love, they have a baby, and it's kind of in between those two pieces of punctuation. So you only want to use a semicolon when the ideas are pretty related, right? So don't just use them like a period, they're different. All right, so there's examples, right? We have an incorrect comma splice next to incorrect, and then we have three ways of fixing that. One with a semicolon, one with a period, and one with a comma and conjunction. All right, cool. So a comma splice error only occurs when two independent clauses are connected by a comma. So there is a comma splice right there. The point of this is to say, don't be scared of commas, because sometimes they are needed just because you sometimes make comma splice errors. So it's a particular type of error, but it does not mean that commas are bad. Moving right along. We are on to semicolon and colons, right? Semicolons and colons. So, semicolons. As already mentioned, they join two related independent clauses, but they also act as a super comma. So, if you have a list and you have items on that list that have commas, you use a semicolon to make it clear that this is the end of one item and we're moving on to the second item. So in our example, the Clean Air Act was written by Joe Breeze, comma, New York, that's where he's from, apparently. Then we have a semicolon. Beware, comma, Illinois, semicolon, because that's the end of that item in the list. And then Bob Smoggins, yuck, 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 comma, California, period. Okay, next sentence. You'll often see this when you have cities and states. I've lived in Youngstown, comma, Ohio. End of that item, you move on. Seoul, Republic of Korean, semicolon. Lubbock, Texas, semicolon. Pittsburgh, PA. Which is true, because I'm worldly. Boom. Colons, so next part. Colons introduce a list when the list is not essential to the reader's understanding of the sentence. I like to think about this way. If I have a list, and my list is coming at the end of a complete sentence, I can use a colon. If I don't do that. Right? If I don't have a complete sentence and I have a list that I want to give, right? I can't do that. And usually when you have that error, you can just take the semicolon out and have take the colon out and have a sentence. So in the first example, some of the books that I've read this summer included, right? That's not a complete sentence. You can just remove that colon and you have a fine, beautiful list in your sentence. Second example, I've read a number of books this summer. That is the end of a thought, and then you give the list. Colon, Lord of the Flies, Catcher in the Rye, Huckleberry Finn. Right. Next example is exactly the same. Look at it at your own pace. Colons are also used to provide readers with an example of what they're discussing in a sentence. So sometimes you'll say something in a sentence, then you'll have a direct example of that. I think the second example there is a better example. There is only one thing that will bring about a change in the way people treat each other. Compassion, right? So you give a sentence and then you give an exact example of that. So you can use a colon there. Okay, perfect. Next, apostrophes. Dun dun dun. Apostrophes used to show possession, not to make a noun plural. So, Florida zoos have many turtles. First, our zoo's turtle is named Ralph. In the first occasion, or first example, we have many zoos. In the second example, we have a zoo that owns a turtle. So, apostrophes are used to show possession. This gets slightly more complicated when we start talking about personal names ending in an S. So, when you have a personal name that ends in the S, you are either going to add an apostrophe to make it possessive, or you're going to add an apostrophe S to make it possessive. And that depends on how it sounds. If you read the name and it sounds natural to add, to make the sound of an additional S, which is like an EEZ noise, then you do an apostrophe S. If you say the word and it doesn't sound natural to add an extra S, then don't do it. Right? So for example, he joined Charles's army in 1642. That sounds completely fine. Thomas's brother is a crazy person. Sounds wonderful, right? Next examples at the bottom. Bridges, right? Appeal was denied. Sounds terrible. Connor's, it's horrible. You don't do it. It doesn't happen naturally, so you just add an apostrophe. Okay, when you have a plural noun that ends in an S, all you got to do is add an apostrophe to make it plural. Or possessive, sorry. The girl's dog hated the boy's cat. So we have many girls who own a dog, and you have many boys who own a cat. So when the plural nouns don't end in an S, you just add an apostrophe S. So if you have children, which is plural, apostrophe S to make those many children possessive. Big note, possessive pronouns, his, her, their, etc. never get an apostrophe. That's strangely enough a common mistake, so don't do that. Boom. Now we're on to some commonly confused words, phrases, sentences, etc. So here's the list. Commonly confused words. There, who and whom, it's and its. So do you know the difference? First example, there, E-R-E is positional. Go over there, it's over there, okay? There, E-I-R is possessive. Their parents, so their parents, they're the parents of these people, right? They dropped them off. Okay, and then finally, their apostrophe RE is a contraction of they are. Those are different, don't mix them up. Second one is who and whom. So these ones are a little bit confusing. You use who when you're referring to the subject of a clause, and you use whom when you're referring to an object. So subjects are the parts of the sentence that do things, and objects are the parts of a sentence that they have things done to them. So for one example, let's take a simple sentence. I love you, which is true, dear listener. If you were to try to find out who the I was in that sentence, you would use who, because that is the thing performing the action. So who loves you? Now, let's say you want to find out who the you is in that sentence. Since that is the object, the thing receiving the action, you would use whom. I love whom. Okay, does that make sense? It's a little bit confusing. It kind of confuses me all the time, but there you go. Finally, this is the its and its, right? One's a contraction, one's possessive. Just don't mess it up. All right, finally, between you and me. This is also kind of a complicated one. The short of it is that if you ever use between, after that you use me. So, in the examples, this is between James and I. No, it's between James and me. Between you and I. No, you use between. So it's you and me. A more complicated way to think about this is that me is an indirect object pronoun and I is a subject pronoun. So to know what an indirect object is, again, we have to know what an object is. Object receives action. So an indirect object is the thing that gets the thing that received the action. So in our example below, he wants, right? He is the object, is the subject. He wants to talk. So what gets the action? What is wanted? A talk, right? So that talk is the direct object. And who gets this talk? You and me. So you would use me there because it is an indirect object pronoun. And a way to check that, if you ever have an example of that, is to get rid of the first subject, right? So he wants to talk to I. No, that's weird. He wants to talk to me. All right. One last thing, don't confuse would have, should have, and could have with would have, could have, should have. That's how you talk. So don't do that. It's a common mistake. Don't do it. No. All right. So this concludes the FGCU presentation on common grammar mistakes. There you can find our address, you can find our website, our Facebook, and our Twitter. Go to all those things for more information, or if you still have some questions, or for any of your writing needs. Thank you very much for listening.